The four hats on Mei Chin's small wooden table were the finest things in Redemption Gulch, and no one cared. They were woven from river reeds she had gathered and cured herself, shaped into broad, practical brims that offered real sanctuary from the punishing Nevada sun. They were light, they were sturdy, and they were utterly ignored. Men in their sweat-stained felt Stetsons walked past, their boots kicking up clouds of ochre dust that settled on her wares like a fine coat of failure. Women clutching parasols hurried by on the boardwalk, their eyes fixed on the dry goods store, never once glancing at the solitary Chinese woman in the gray Cheongsam dress who sat perfectly still behind her display. In a small ceramic bowl next to the hats sat a single silver dime. It was her entire earnings for a week of sitting in the oppressive summer heat, a week of smiling hopefully at faces that looked straight through her. The coin was a lonely, mocking testament to her invisibility. She was 25 years old, a widow for a year since the railroad accident had claimed her husband Wei and left her with little more than a small, dusty plot of land just outside of town, and a set of skills that had no value here. In her homeland, her family had been hat makers for generations. Here, she was just a curiosity, a silent figure at the edge of the town's bustling life. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on the canvas awnings and warping the air above the dusty main street. May could feel a trickle of sweat trace a path down her spine, but she did not move, did not fan herself. Stillness was a kind of armor. If she did not show her discomfort, perhaps the town would not see her desperation. But the town, it seemed, did not see her at all. A shadow fell across her table. May looked up, her practiced, hopeful smile ready. It was Sterling Croft, the man who owned the land office and held the notes on half the businesses in town. He was dressed in a fine wool suit, impossible for the weather, yet he showed no sign of sweat. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his smile was a sharp, polished thing that never reached his pale eyes. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Chin," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. He gestured vaguely at her hats with a gloved hand. "Still trying to sell your novelties?" "They are very good for the sun, Mr. Croft," she replied, her voice soft but clear. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "I'm sure they are. I do hope you sell one soon. The quarterly fee on your husband's claim is due next week. It would be a shame to lose that little piece of memory." He didn't wait for a reply, simply tipped his hat and continued down the street, a man moving through a world he was certain he owned. May's hands tightened in her lap. He knew as well as she did that the dime in her bowl would not cover a fraction of the fee. The land was all she had left of Wei. It was barren, rocky, and seemingly worthless, but it was hers. Losing it would mean being truly adrift, a prospect that chilled her more than the summer heat. She watched Croft disappear into the saloon and felt the fragile shell of her composure begin to crack. The sun beat down, the dust swirled, and her 4 perfect hats sat unsold. Therefore, when the horseman appeared at the edge of town, she barely noticed him. He was just another rider, another shape moving through the shimmering heat. But this one was different. He rode slowly, his posture weary, his horse favoring its left foreleg. As he drew closer, the town seemed to grow quieter. Men paused their conversations. The blacksmith stopped his hammering. This was not a rancher or a prospector. The way he sat his horse, the low-slung holster on his hip, the utter lack of hurry in his movements, it all spoke of a dangerous economy of motion. He dismounted in front of the livery, his face obscured by the shadow of a hat that had seen better decades. It was crumpled and stained, its brim torn. He spoke briefly to the stable owner, gesturing to his horse's leg, then turned and scanned the street. His eyes, deep-set and tired, passed over the saloon, the general store, the assayer's office, they settled on her. For a long moment he just stood there, 100 feet away, looking at her small table. May felt a prickle of unease. Men like him usually meant trouble. But he did not look menacing, only exhausted. He took off his ruined hat and ran a hand through his dusty hair before letting the hat fall to the ground. Then, with a slow, deliberate gait, he started walking towards her. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. A gunslinger, a man whose reputation likely preceded him in whispers and rumors, was walking directly toward the invisible Chinese woman. He stopped in front of her table, his shadow finally offering her a moment of shade. He was taller than she had realized, with a lean, hard frame. His face was weathered, his jawline sharp beneath a layer of stubble, but it was his hands that caught her attention. The knuckles on his left hand were a network of old, white scars, as if they had been broken and reset more than once. He looked down at the 4 hats, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak, just reached out a calloused finger and lightly touched the brim of the widest one. He traced the intricate pattern of the weave, his touch surprisingly gentle. "This is good work," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough with disuse. May found her own voice after a moment. "Thank you." He picked it up. It was a simple design, with a flat top and a generous brim that would shield a man's neck and face completely. He turned it over in his hands, examining the stitching, the way the reeds were perfectly joined. Then he did something that made a soft gasp ripple through the onlookers on the boardwalk. He put it on his head. He adjusted the fit, tilting it slightly. It settled perfectly. He looked at her, his tired eyes now shaded by her handiwork. "How much?" he asked. $2, she said, the price feeling impossibly high on her tongue. He didn't haggle. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He untied it and tipped 2 heavy silver dollars onto the table. They landed with a solid, definitive clink, scattering the dust and making her lonely dime seem insignificant. "I'll take it," he said. He nodded once, a gesture of finality, and turned to walk back towards the livery, leaving his old, ruined hat lying in the street. The spell was broken. A murmur went through the crowd. A rancher who had passed her table a dozen times that morning now edged closer, squinting at the 3 remaining hats. "Say, are those cool to wear?" he asked. Before May could answer, another man chimed in. "If it's good enough for Jasper Thorne, it's good enough for me." So that was his name, Jasper Thorne. The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken stories. May looked at the 2 silver dollars gleaming on her table, then at the back of the man wearing her hat, a man who, in a single, simple transaction, had made the whole town see her for the first time. But she could not yet know that the attention he had drawn was a double-edged sword, and that Sterling Croft had been watching the entire exchange from the shadows of the saloon doorway. The change was immediate and startling. Within the hour, May had sold the other 3 hats. Men who had ignored her for a year were now pressing dollar coins into her hand, asking when she would have more. She promised to return the next day, her heart a confusing mix of elation and apprehension. The money was a relief, a tangible reprieve from the pressure of Croft's deadline. But the attention was unsettling. It was all because of him, because of Jasper Thorne. She saw him again later that afternoon, sitting on a bench outside the blacksmith's forge, patiently waiting while his horse was being tended to. He wore her hat, angled low against the afternoon sun. He seemed content to be still, a man at home in his own silence. He didn't look like a killer, but she had seen the way the other men gave him a wide berth, the respectful fear in their eyes. As she was packing her empty table to leave, trouble found her, as it so often found those who had just begun to hope. 2 burly freight hands, men she recognized as frequently in the company of Sterling Croft, swaggered over to her. One of them, A thick-necked man with a cruel mouth grinned at her. "Well, well, look at the little china doll finally making a sale," he sneered. His partner laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Heard that gunman Thorne bought one of your little baskets," the second man said. "Guess he ain't got no taste." May kept her eyes down, focusing on folding the cloth that had covered her table. She had learned long ago that engaging with men like this was a mistake. Silence was her only shield. But her silence seemed to provoke them. The first man kicked the leg of her table. It wasn't a hard kick, but it was enough to send it crashing over. Her ceramic bowl shattered on the hard-packed earth, and the precious coins she had earned scattered in the dust. "Aw, look what you did, Frank," the second man said with mock sympathy. "You made her drop her fortune." May knelt, her movements stiff and deliberate. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. She began to pick up the coins, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the dirt. This was the true nature of the town, she thought. A moment of kindness was always followed by an act of casual cruelty. "Leave her be," a low voice commanded. May looked up. Jasper Thorne was standing there, not 10 feet away. He hadn't moved quickly, but he seemed to have materialized from the heat and shadows. Her hat sat squarely on his head, its brim hiding his eyes. Frank, the thick-necked man, turned and spat in the dust. "This ain't your concern, Thorne. Just some town business." "You knocked over the lady's table," Jasper said. His voice was flat, without inflection, yet it carried an unmistakable weight. "You'll pay her for the damages, and you'll pick up her table." Frank and his companion exchanged a look, a silent communication of bravado and stupidity. Frank took a step forward, puffing out his chest. He was a good 6 inches taller than Jasper and outweighed him by 50 pounds of muscle and fat. "Or what?" Frank challenged. "You gonna shoot me over a broken bowl?" Jasper didn't answer. He just stood there. That stillness was more unnerving than any threat. Frank, mistaking silence for weakness, decided to press his advantage. He swung a clumsy, powerful fist aimed at Jasper's head. What happened next was a blur of fluid motion. Jasper didn't draw his gun. He didn't even seem to move his feet. He simply swayed back, letting the punch whistle past his ear. As Frank's arm overextended, Jasper's scarred left hand shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm. He caught Frank's elbow, and with a slight twist of his body, used the man's own momentum to guide him forward. Frank stumbled, lost his balance, and plunged head first into the horse trough beside the blacksmith shop, with a tremendous splash. The second man stared, his mouth agape. He had his hand halfway to the hilt of the large knife on his belt, but he froze as Jasper's gaze fell upon him. Those tired eyes were no longer tired. They were cold and sharp, and they held a promise of swift, efficient violence that the freight hand understood on a primal level. "Pick up the table," Jasper said again, his voice still quiet. The man scrambled to obey. He righted the table, his hands shaking. Frank sputtered and clawed his way out of the trough, soaked and humiliated. The entire street, which had gone silent at the first sign of conflict, was watching. Jasper walked over to where May was still kneeling. He bent down and began helping her collect the scattered coins, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly deft. He placed them gently in her palm. Just then, Sterling Croft emerged from his office, his expression one of deep concern. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, what is all this commotion?" He strode over, his polished boots stopping inches from May's hands. "My sincerest apologies, Mrs. Chen. These men work for my freight company. I cannot imagine what came over them." He shot a venomous glare at the two soaked and humbled thugs. "You will apologize to the lady and compensate her for this disgraceful display." He then pulled a $5 gold piece from his pocket and pressed it into May's hand. "For the broken bowl and your trouble." It was a performance, and everyone knew it. He was asserting his authority, turning the situation to his advantage. but as he straightened up, his gaze met Jasper's. For a fleeting second, the mask of the concerned gentleman slipped. May, standing now, saw it clearly. Croft's eyes weren't on Jasper's holstered pistol. They were fixed on his scarred left hand, the one that had so expertly dispatched Frank. A flicker of something, not just anger, but a cold, sharp recognition, passed across Croft's face before he concealed it again. He knew that hand, or what it represented. What had started as a simple act of kindness over a hat had now become something far more complicated and dangerous. Jasper Thorne had not just bought a hat. He had bought into her trouble, and in doing so had drawn the focused, malevolent attention of the most powerful man in town. Later that evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, casting long shadows that cooled the scorched earth, Jasper found May near the edge of town, where she had tethered her small cart and mule. She was carefully packing her newly repaired table, her movements economical and precise. He approached quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. The hat she had made for him was in his hands, not on his head. "I wanted to apologize, ma'am," he began, turning the hat's brim over and over. "I seem to have brought you the wrong kind of attention." May paused her work and looked at him. In the fading light, he looked less like a fearsome gunslinger and more like a man carrying a heavy burden. "You did not bring it, Mr. Thorne. It was already here. You only made it visible." "Call me Jasper," he said, "and it seems to me that visibility is a dangerous thing in this town." "Being invisible is also dangerous," she countered softly. "It allows men like Mr. Croft to believe they can do as they please." He nodded, conceding the point. He watched her for a moment, the way her hands moved with such purpose. "Why do you stay here, Mrs. Chen? This place, it doesn't seem to value what you have to offer." A wave of weariness washed over her, so profound it was almost physical. She leaned against the cart, the story of her life in this town feeling too heavy to hold inside any longer. "My husband Way is buried here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He worked on the railroad. He saved every cent to buy a small homestead claim just north of here. He believed in this place. He believed in the promise of the land." She looked down at her own hands. "It is the only thing that is mine. In this whole country, the only piece of ground that belongs to me." Jasper was silent for a long time, his gaze distant. He seemed to be looking at something far beyond the dusty streets of Redemption Gulch. He finally raised his left hand, examining the scarred knuckles in the twilight. "I understand that," he said, his voice thick with a sudden raw emotion that surprised her. "Wanting to hold on to the one thing that's yours." He took a deep breath. "My family had a farm back in Ohio. Good land. We worked it for 2 generations. Then a man came. A smooth talker like your Mr. Croft. He had papers, fancy words. He convinced my father to sign a loan against the farm for new equipment. The contract was a lie. The interest rates were impossible. He took everything. The land, the house, all of it. All with a piece of paper and a smile." He looked directly at her, and the pain in his eyes was so plain, so unshielded, it made her ache in sympathy. "My name isn't Thorne," he said quietly. "It's Miller, Jacob Miller. And the man who signed that paper, the man I've been tracking for 3 years, his name was Sterling." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The way Croft had looked at Jacob's hand. It wasn't just a hand. It was a signature, a history of a past crime that had just walked back into his life. Sterling Croft was the man who had destroyed Jacob Miller's family. Jacob. The name felt more real, more solid than Jasper, touched the brim of the hat he held. "This is good work," he repeated, just as he had that morning. "It's honest. A man like Croft, a man who builds his life on tricks and lies, He wouldn't understand a thing made with this much care. The hat was no longer just a hat. It was a bridge between them, a symbol of a shared understanding that ran deeper than words. They were two different people, from two different worlds, bound together by the same enemy, and a mutual respect for things that were honestly made and dearly held. The next morning, Croft made his move. He didn't send his thugs this time. He sent the law. The territorial marshal, a portly man named Blevins, whose loyalty to Croft was an open secret, arrived at May's small rented room behind the laundry. He carried a document with an official-looking seal. "Mrs. Chen," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "this is a notice of lien against your property. It seems your late husband co-signed a rather substantial loan for mining equipment with Mr. Croft. The loan is in default." He handed her the paper. "You have 48 hours to pay the outstanding balance of $200, or the property is forfeit to the lien holder." May's blood ran cold as she looked at the document. Way's signature was there, but it looked wrong, slightly shaky, not his confident script. It was a forgery. A clumsy one, but with Croft's influence and a bought marshal, it was as good as real. $200 was an astronomical sum, as impossible for her to produce as $2,000. This was it. This was how Croft would take her land. It was a checkmate. She could run, pack her few belongings, and disappear on the morning freight train, just another anonymous victim of the frontier. But the thought of Way's grave, of the one piece of earth that was theirs, made her stand her ground. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but beneath it a different feeling was taking root, a quiet, stubborn fury. She made a decision. It was a choice that cost her the very thing she was fighting for, a gamble that staked her entire future on the word of a man she had known for less than a day. She took the deed to her land from the small wooden box where she kept her few treasures. She walked through the town, her head held high, ignoring the curious stares, and went directly to the livery stable where Jacob was preparing his horse to leave. He saw her coming and paused, a question in his eyes. She didn't waste time with explanations. She held out the folded, precious document. "This is the deed to my land," she said, her voice steady. "Mr. Croft just served me with a false eviction notice. He wants it badly." Jacob looked from the deed to her face. "Why are you showing this to me?" "Because my husband was a clever man," she said, tapping the paper. "Before he died, he told me something. He was a railroad surveyor before he was a laborer. He knew the land. He told me there is a spring on the north end of our property. A small one, but it runs year-round, even in the dry season." He marked its location on the back of this deed. She unfolded it, revealing a small, hand-drawn map on the reverse with a single X marked in faded ink. "Water is more valuable than gold in this territory, Mr. Miller. A man like Croft doesn't want the dirt. He wants the water. That is why he is trying to steal it." She pushed the deed into his hand. "You are hunting him for what he did to your family. I am fighting him for what he is doing to me. This is the only weapon I have. Use it. It is all the help I can give you." He stared at the deed, then back at her, a look of profound astonishment on his face. She was giving him her last possession, the very anchor of her life, trusting him to use it not just for her, but for his own quest for justice. It was an act of faith so absolute it left him speechless. The fight for a small, dusty plot of land had just become a war for everything. 3 months later, the first chill of autumn was settling over Redemption Gulch. The relentless summer heat had broken, and the air had a crisp, clean edge to it. The dust still rose from the main street, but it seemed less oppressive now. On the corner where May Chen had once sat with her 4 lonely hats, there now stood a small but proper shop. A freshly painted sign hung above the door, the black letters stark and clear against the white wood. Chin and Miller Haberdashery. Inside, the shop was warm and smelled of cured reeds, canvas, and leather. Rows of hats lined the shelves, each one a testament to May's skill. They came in different styles now, some with the wide brims Jacob favored, others with rounder crowns for ranchers, and even a few with smaller, stylish brims for the town's women. People came from as far as Carson City to buy a Miller hat, as they had come to be known. The hats were more than just headwear. They had become a quiet symbol of the town's shift. Wearing one meant you stood for honest work and fair dealing, a subtle act of defiance against the shadow Sterling Croft had cast for so long. Jacob Miller, no longer the weary drifter Jasper Thorne, stood behind the counter, helping a farmer decide between two different styles. He was no longer a man running from his past, but a man building a future. The information May had given him had been the key. Armed with the deed and its hidden map, he hadn't confronted Croft with a gun. He had used the telegraph. He sent a wire to the federal land office in Sacramento, detailing Croft's fraudulent lien and his attempt to illegally seize control of an unregistered water source. Water rights were a federal matter, far beyond the reach of a corrupt territorial marshal. An investigator arrived within 2 weeks. Faced with federal charges for fraud and water theft, and with the townspeople, emboldened by his vulnerability, beginning to speak of his other predatory dealings, Croft's empire crumbled. He sold his holdings for pennies on the dollar and slipped away on a midnight train, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived years before. The power he had held over Redemption Gulch evaporated with him. Marshal Blevins was quietly replaced a month later. May was in the back room, her nimble fingers weaving the reeds for a new hat. She worked with a quiet contentment now, the constant worry that had been her companion for so long finally gone. She was a partner in a respected business, a valued member of the community she had once been invisible to. She had not only kept her land, but with the new well Jacob had helped her dig at the spring's source, it was now one of the most valuable plots in the county. At the end of the day, after the last customer had left, Jacob came into the back room. He didn't speak, just watched her work for a moment. The easy silence between them was as comfortable and sturdy as the things they built. On a wooden peg by the door hung the first hat he had ever bought from her. It was weathered now, stained with the sweat and dust of his journey, its brim softened from use. It was the hat that had started everything, the simple purchase that had unraveled a web of lies and forged an unlikely partnership. He walked over to her workbench and picked up a stray piece of reed that had fallen to the floor, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger. "The nights are getting colder," he said, his voice quiet. May looked up from her work, a small smile touching her lips. She met his gaze, and in his eyes she saw not a gunslinger or a drifter, but a man who had found a place to stop running, a man who had found a home. "Yes," she replied softly, "they are." They had built something real, something solid, not on grand proclamations or fiery passions, but on a foundation of shared work, quiet respect, and the simple, profound courage to trust one another when no one else would. In the vast, harsh landscape of the frontier, it was more than enough. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.